down the line and ask our panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll get to some opening remarks and some discussion. Cal, can I start with you?
Yeah, good afternoon. Cal Logan, I'm the Regional Freight Manager for Network Rail Scotland. I'm the conduit between our freight operators, our freight customers and the railway.
Thank you, Guy.
Guy Bates, Network Rail's Head of Freight Development. Look after our development of our freight estate nationwide, and when we have one, our council.
Thank you, James.
I'm James Singh, I'm General Management Surveyor for Maritime Transport. We're operator of terminals and road vehicles, so truly multimodal operation.
Thank you. This is not John Keith, Matthew.
Yes, very eagle-eyed of you there, Maggie. I'm in fact Matthew Brigger. I'm Senior Policy and Public Affairs Manager at Getme. We are the Infrastructure Manager for the Channel Tunnel and the Transport Operator for tunnels.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mike.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Mike King. I'm Commercial Director for PD Ports Unitised Business. So, yeah, I look after container terminals, ferry terminals, and PD's intermodal rail business.
Thank you. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Maggie Simpson. I'm the Director General of the Rail Freight Group. And if you want to know more about Rail Freight Group, we are just behind that lovely wagon behind you, and you can go and get some information if you want any more. But we're here today to talk about rail freight and what it's doing to support long distance and international supply chains on behalf of the customers that we serve. And we can't really talk about those, I think, without talking about what's going on in the market, what's the trade trends and things that are happening at the moment, and what that means. So, Mike, let me come to you because the ports always know this first. So,
to me first, Maggie.
What are the trends we're seeing at the moment around UK trade, and what's that meaning for rail?
Okay, yeah. So probably two things that I would probably want to call out would be over the last year or so, maybe a couple of years, like freight from a port operator's perspective, especially our intermodal freight, containerized traffic. Been like a relatively subdued kind of growth, I would say there. So yeah, not a huge amount of growth with volume over the quay. That's forced all kinds of, I would say, collaboration with our rail freight partners, and yeah, a bit of kind of consolidation there and a bit of smarter thinking, if I think to our Scotland service. So yeah, I think relatively subdued growth with volume over the quay. But having said that, the second thing to call out is the volumes through the port we're still seeing, but they're coming via rail rather than over the quay. So I think supply chain kind of disruption has meant that lots of volume that would have ordinarily come to Teesport via Europe, would have transshipped in Europe and come up to Tees on a feeder, is now starting to direct call into the UK. So some of the big BCOs that we work with at Tees, there's a growing confidence from them in rail freight. And yeah, rail freight, say the UK rail infrastructure's got its fair share of criticism, but I think in an increasingly volatile world and dynamic, by and large, rail freight trains are departing and arriving when customers expect them to. And I think our big kind of retail BCOs really value that. That brings like a predictability, and their ability to forecast is improved. So we're seeing a lot more of a shift with volume arriving via rail than over the quay in recent times.
Isn't it? Because if we'd been sitting on one of these panels 5-10 years ago, we'd have been talking about port centric.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually,
yeah,
in effect, that's what you've created.
That's
right?
great. Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a shift there, and I think it's created by the disruption in Europe. Maybe there's a bit of a shift to direct call into the UK, and retailers and others don't want cargo sitting around on quaysides gathering detention and demurrage. The quicker you can get it out of there, the better. And yeah, rail freight provides a really steady flow of volume north. Yeah, kind of avoids that congestion and disruption. But yeah, that's one of the things we're seeing.
Brilliant. And Matthew, from your perspective at the Dover Straits, what are you seeing in terms of those generalised trends?
Yeah, we very much see this through the lens of trade on the short straits, and I think the most important aspect that we would have to reflect on is just this period of stabilisation that we've seen post-Brexit. The shuttle handles about 1 million trucks per year between the UK and France, so we get a good insight into what that trade looks like and what the dynamics in play are. The impact is still being felt, I would say, post-Brexit, but there has been a period of stabilisation, and we do see that there is now greater resilience in a lot of these supply chains, and that some of the non-tariff barriers that have come into place have been challenging at first, but now things that customers of ours are certainly taking into account with the support of our GetLink customs services as well. They've been able to overcome some of these, but it nonetheless remains quite a challenging period in that market. If we look at it from the rail freight perspective specifically, I think you have to step back a little bit further and look at it from a longer, over a longer time period, really. That trade through the tunnel for rail freight specifically really peaked in the late 90s and has subsequently really been quite badly impacted by things like the migrant crisis. These are issues that no longer exist because of the investment that we've put in on the French side and around the French terminal, but the long lag, if you like, from that initial impact is still there. So there is a huge opportunity, I think, in that respect to grow rail freight, in particular through the short straits, through the Channel Tunnel.
And James, within the maritime business, you're handling goods from ports, from Europe, from a whole host of areas, and you're handling them by road and by rail. So from your perspective, how's the market?
I think it's slow and steady at the moment. Obviously, we've not seen since COVID the big peaks and troughs that we've seen there. There's been a slow recovery back to warehousing, getting back to normal levels and having capacity. People have put more resilience in their supply chains now, so they've moved from the just-in-time to give that little bit of slack now to enable that resilience. So it's been a slow and steady sort of increase post-COVID stabilisation, and we've seen that now through sort of last year and this year has shown the same pattern. So I think we're back to pre-COVID levels now, and we'll have the traditional peaks coming in August, September, October towards Christmas, and then low down again until Chinese New Year, and then back through for Easter.
And that resilience you talk about, that move, that slight stepping back from just in time, does that suit rail?
Definitely. I think it's really well suited to rail, and we can give additional chances with that as well. So like we can get things off key and avoid key rent. We can have inland storage which is closer to the customer's premises, so they can actually call it off quicker and easier if they do need it in a bit of a hurry. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it's just the right set of timings now to enable that for secure growth going forward.
And Guy, let's come back to the Channel Tunnel and tell us a bit, what you've been up to.
Well, yeah, okay. So I thought you were going to ask me about intermodal. I just did some numbers on that quickly on my phone. But let's talk about Channel Tunnel intermodal. It's a very simple number, 0. Can't get any worse. Obviously, we were sat here last year talking about our ambition to take an interest in a site in Barking, which uniquely connects to HS1. So therefore, you've got the Continental Rail Freight Network on London's doorstep. We concluded that deal earlier this year. We're now on with preparing the site, very much with a view to reintroduction of Channel Tunnel intermodal services through Q1 next year, hopefully, possibly sooner, but we're banking on that. We got some engineering work to do within the site to make it fit for purpose, but that's something that we are definitely looking at, and even from the conversations on the stand 10 minutes before I came on here, that does look a lot more promising. I think just generally in intermodal, we got 3,000 freights a week roughly on the network. A good third of that is intermodal. So the resilience of the maritime intermodal offer, maritime as in small m, not big M, James, it does seem to be holding up really well. Despite the state of the economy, we're still buying lots from China, and a good proportion of that stuff is getting on trains to get away from our major ports rather than clogging up roads. So it seems to be a decent, healthy part of the rail freight picture just now. And obviously, Channel Tunnel intermodal will only build on that, really.
Yeah, fantastic. And Cal, finally, as we're going down the line, obviously, a lot of your interests are in those long-distance supply chains to and from Scotland, Central Belt and beyond. What are the market trends you're seeing through a Scottish lens, and what are some of the things you've been involved in recently?
Yeah, so Maggie, the big things for Scottish customers are they want simplicity, they want reliability, and they want it to be a competitive product. So simplicity,
we're all really good at talking about what we do. We're all very technical people. But people that are buying rail freight solutions don't necessarily want to know about gauge, or they don't want to know about the route availability. They just want to know what time that box will be on their loading dock and what time it will be away again. So I think a lot of what we're having to do is to kind of bring back that simplicity and make sure that we're talking to people in a way that's more inclusive, that's going to attract more smaller businesses, because someone that's only got a small volume is not necessarily going to be interested in freight because they're concerned that they're not big enough, and that's something we often hear. We don't have the volume to do a train, but there's consolidation services around that can support that. The other thing is reliability. If you have put your trust in a product and that product does not perform, then that's very difficult for a supply chain to adjust to. We often find as well is that people mistakenly judge freight performance based on passenger journeys that they've been on, and that's not a good reflection of how reliable freight is. We have 15-minute regulatory performance targets that almost 95% of our trains arrive within that 15 minutes, and our cancellation metrics were below 1%. So we are a very
Just say that again. So 95% of freight trains to and from Scotland arriving within the 15 minutes of the book time.
So
and a cancellation rate of
less than 1%.
Less than 1%. So that when you compare that to the road network, that's pretty amazing, right?
It's a really good message, and it's something that we need to talk lots about and make sure that people understand it. But coming back to that, the competitiveness, we are working in a market that rail is not the first thought for people. We should be looking to try and make rail freight, and it's the question of, do we use a rail freight option or do we use a road option? In Scotland, a lot of our volume goes into the central belt, so there's always going to be a first and last mile. We don't have the scale of businesses that have their own rail connected sites, so we're always going to be looking at how we fit in as a point in that supply chain, and it needs to be an easy decision for companies to be able to move into rail, because whether we're talking about cost, we're talking about anything else, we need that reliability and simplicity before people can start hearing about the benefits, the environmental benefits, the social, the economic benefits. All of that good stuff will only come if we have got people in the door and talking to us about what they're doing.
And just on that last mile, James, you're fitting lorry charging points at your rail terminals, right?
Yes.
Unpack that for us.
So, it works perfectly for us. Like I say, without rail, you can't have road, and you can't have road without rail. They are intrinsically linked together. There's always a first and last mile. Now, because rail freight's doing the heavy lifting from the long distance from the ports, that's enabled us as a business to transition quicker to alternative fuels and pick up battery electric vehicles, into our fleet a lot quicker. Because we're doing shorter stem mileage in and out of the rail terminals, we aim to be within 20 miles of getting the box close as possibly be, and that's enabled us to hit BEVs up and decarbonise even further on top of the savings of freight on rail anyway.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's a really good way, I think, of seeing how road and rail are complementary to each other and as part of that sustainable transport. I'm jumping about the topics here, but I couldn't resist popping that one in. But Guy and Cal, I'd like to go back to the work that's been happening recently on seeing whether freight can get to Scotland faster. Guy, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, if you come by our stand's too grand a word, booth.
Over the back of the wagon.
We've got a lovely banner that we had brought up that is reflective of some work that's been going on over the last month, where we've been successfully trialling 90-mile-an-hour operation of intermodal services. So the same box, the same wagon, pretty much looks like the same loco that you would see, but running at a much higher speed. And the headline speed is quite interesting, but what's much more interesting is how trains operating at that headline speed make their way through the timetable. Traditionally, a freight train gets regulated for a passenger train to go past. Now, you can all have different opinions about that, but if the freight train is capable of 90 miles an hour, it doesn't get regulated. And we've ended up with, in the trial at least, proven transit times of about 4.5 hours from East Mids Gateway to the central belt of Scotland, which I like driving, but I don't think I could match that in a car, and certainly not in a truck. So it gives rail at last an offer that is something other than road. You're not competing head-on with road. You're giving a journey time saving for parties who might not have considered rail, something unique and different to AMAT. So it's the same stuff, but just speeded up, which is quite exciting.
Brilliant, because I think, Mike, in your market, you're working for retailers and people like that. How time sensitive are they?
Yeah, a lot of that cargo is time critical, and it's a really good statistic that you mentioned there. 95% of those trains arriving within 15 minutes and less than 1% cancellations. That's the reason some of those big retailers use that Scotland service from Tees. So we've got Tees Scotland services ran for 12 years now-ish, give or take. Jeff's nodding. Jeff's the guy who started it, actually, so he'll definitely know that more than most. But the reason that service has endured is reliability. And if there are any issues with those services, if it is cancelled for one reason or another, that cargo is put straight onto trucks, and there's a kind of dynamic response to it. Any shifts there, really. So, yeah, really kind of time-sensitive cargoes. I think anybody who works with retailers knows that. It's, product on a shelf is like not on a shelf is like a cardinal sin. So yeah, they drive kind of high standards as a result of that, I would say.
Yeah. So if we can get the train there even faster, then we open up new routes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it increases capacity and and confidence in those services.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure. Because I think things like be able to take trains going faster is great, that uses the infrastructure we've got better, but the kind of work that you're doing in taking on Barking and upgrading it is a great example of how we can make the best of the infrastructure by spending tactically in the right places. But we know we've got some other gaps. Matthew, course celeb for you?
Well, first of all, I think I would like to thank Network Rail for the work they are doing at Barking. I think it's very welcome. It's a great idea to redevelop this terminal so that it can start to receive intermodal traffic through the Channel Tunnel, which this guy mentioned earlier is suboptimal at the moment. I should mention we were probably prepared as Getlink to play a more proactive role in that until we came into conflict with a rather more aggressive revaluation proposal from the valuation office, but we'll park that for now. I think it's a great development and it offers real opportunity. The other point that was touched on earlier from Cal, the rather drier topic of rail gauge, is still a significant one for us. We think that the restrictions on the conventional lines through Kent still pose a bit of a barrier for expanding rail freight between Europe and hubs across the UK. The piece of infrastructure between Dolan's Moor and...
Just a second, because you're on.
I'm not sure I can project my voice much louder than that.
Expect your battery's gone.
It's gone? Or back?
My
voice is back.
It was just going through a tunnel.
I just lost my voice after being at the World Cup for a week. The piece of infrastructure between Dolan's Moor near the Channel Tunnel entrance and Wembley, we still think is a missing piece in this puzzle for a more complete network between the UK and Europe. So we think that a modest amount of infrastructure investment to clear the gauge from W9 to W12 would really open that up and provide a much bigger opportunity for the growth of international rail freight going forward.
I mean, it's a really important point to me. I think, HS1 is great and what colleagues are doing at Barking is great, but at the end of the day, it's a high-speed passenger line and there's going to be a limit to the capacity for freight. So having a main bit of the network that you can't get a modern container through does feel a bit...
Yeah, and the paths are available on those lines and through the tunnel as well. We have, at the moment, only about 10% of the Channel Tunnel's capacity for rail freight is being utilised. So there is a lot of room for growth in that area.
And Mike, from Teesport, obviously some of your customers want to get across the Pennines. So how important is that project to upgrade the route across the Pennines to you as a port?
Yeah, it is. It's really important. So we trialled it recently, actually, and there is demand there now for from volume to Tees to get to northwest Manchester. We trialled it. It was just took a little bit too long. little bit
Because
cost
you've got to go
prohibitive.
the long way.
Yeah, which puts in cost, puts in time. It's not ideal. So yeah, it's a really important project just to unlock. Just capacity essentially. We've got trucks running across the M62 every day.
Yeah.
Those assets could be better served doing something different if we've got the ability to send trains across to the northwest. So I think, I'm not sure, but I think there is also, beyond the Trans-Pennine route upgrade bit, there might be some stuff local authorities need to do as well to make sure that we fully benefit and fully connect Teesport to that upgrade.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The point is that you've got a demand for those services now.
Yeah, it's there now,
We talk to people about that project, and they're like, "Well, how will you know that you're going to use this gauge's capacity?" And you're like, "Well, we've got the business there today."
It's there, and we've trialled it, and it was just a little bit cost prohibitive, a little bit time, a little bit lengthy than it should have been really. And of course, we're kind of deviating the path south to come north again, and that's just not needed. So
Yeah. And Cal, up in Scotland, if you could wave your magic wand and do, two small enhancements to make freight better, what would you do?
2 small enhancements. Well, I think one that would be of interest is probably electrifying the Edinburgh sub. Small enhancements probably not the answer for that, but that would give us electric routes onto both coasts and up and down the whole length of the country, removing us from more kind of bottleneck of Edinburgh Waverley Station. So that would be really good. But then also getting gauge enhancements to the north, anything for Inverness and Aberdeen as well. Being able to move larger containers, 9'6" and slightly wider containers on a wider range of wagons, that would be really beneficial. There is volume there. There are refrigerated commodities. Scotland has got an absolutely fantastic food and drinks export market. There is a lot of volume that could be tapped into with the rate of that, but the business case has got to stack up. We have to work with Transport Scotland and build the case, and the more opportunities that we know about helps us to be able to do that. So it's really important that we get wind of those and work them up as they go along.
Cal and I were at an exhibition in Scotland earlier in the year, taking rail freight into the green energy sector. And I have to say that when you go to an exhibition like this in Scotland, the shortbread is much better. Testimony to the food and drink sector. I literally ate my entire body weight in Scottish butter shortbread that week, I can tell you. So Multimodal's got something to live up to there, I think, definitely. Folks, I'm going to be coming to you for some questions just in a couple of minutes. But James, for you and in your business, what's the key to convincing more customers to take advantage of rail?
I think it's getting the message out there, and obviously because we act as an aggregator, and what it says is the barriers to entry that Carl was saying now, it's seen as complicated, slow, things like that, and people don't move enough volume to justify a train. But we as aggregators, that's our bread and butter. We worry about that, and we'll just come out with a solution and go, just let us move your box. And I'm sure we have customers that we actually rail boxes from port to inland to their warehouses, and don't even have an idea that their boxes travelled on rail at all. And I think it's just pushing that message, the BEVs as well on top of that, and plus the decarbonisation. It is letting us we'll do the technical stuff. We've got the risk on the trains. There are trains. Just let us move the box. It's quite simple. The resilience is there. We've got 1,400 trucks to back that up as well. So if things do happen, we had the heat last week and stuff like that with speed restrictions. Everything went through fine. There is any, resilience in there. We've got the trucks to back it up as a business as well. And I think that's the important part, is basically taking that stress and worry away from the customer and having that network to be able to deliver that seamlessly for them.
And Guy, in your role as business development, when you're talking to potential customers, what do you think the key is in getting them from being a potential customer to a customer?
Price, I think. Yeah. As your gaffer says, road sets the price and rail follows, or the other way around. Road's the price maker. So everything revolves around making the rail offer as efficient as possible, and that's everything from loading gauge to make sure you can use the most cost-effective wagons are getting the much stuff as possible on the train behind the loco. What can we do for that? We can pursue gauging schemes. We can endorse operators seeking to run heavier, longer trains on our network, which oftentimes isn't such an issue as people thought it was. And just everything we can to take cost out. And that can also be timing as well. You cite an excellent example of the fact that there is market demand trans-Pennine for intermodal. But if we put 6 hours in the journey and knacker up the economics of the rail offer, then no one's going to bite at that. So I think the other thing we have got in our armoury is the scheme we've been running for about the last 24 months, where for any new, genuinely new to rail flow, we can discount track access to 0. Now, long term, you're going to be paying track access again, but certainly during an initial startup phase on a service, maybe if it's an intermodal service, you're not fully up to 80% to begin with on the train, then at least you've got a bit of cost relief at the front end to get the thing going so that more people can see the service, be attracted to it and come on it. Comes back to Cal's point about aggregating volume onto a train. You can start with 50% of a train and the math still just works. By the time the full track access kicks in, you've actually got your train up to full volume.
Yeah,
But it's all cost.
All right, folks. Who's got a question for our panel? You're all bamboozled. Julian.
Thanks, Maggie. I'll get you going. Julian Worth, Institute of Logistics and Transport. Consolidation, aggregation has been mentioned several times in this presentation. It's clearly vital to get the smaller users of rail freight onto rail in an economic way. And it's no coincidence that both James and PD run very successful consolidation services to and from Scotland. Question. Why can't we extend that principle to other parts of the country where the distance is similar, if not quite as long? For example, down into the southwest. And secondly, there are some natural aggregators out there, the 3PLs and the big hauliers, who control very, very substantial volumes of traffic, probably enough in their own right to run trains on individual routes. What can we do to access that 3PL and big haulier controlled volume?
Go on, Guy.
Certainly for the southwest market, Julian, if you had an aggregator who was keen to use rail, that'd be great, but there isn't actually anywhere to put the traffic on rail, so the job for us, frankly, is to identify and develop the facilities that enable rail to actually be an option for anybody in markets like that, and we've done study work previously on the paucity of facilities in the southwest, the southeast, where people live. So there's work to do there. Barking's sort of a bit of answer to that, and possibly the first proper case of our having got on and done something. But I think there's more of those that are required. But again, once there is a facility or the realistic prospect of a facility, then you can start talking seriously with parties who command the traffic and for whom the natural progression to intermodal and rail should therefore make sense to them economically.
James, you're putting trains together for people all over the country. Gaps? Where would you like to be going next?
I think there's great opportunity just all over the UK, to be fair, for the domestic side of the business. So, you travel home today, you'll probably see 1,000,001 curtain siders going up and down the country. As Julian says, it's the big 3PLs when we're getting, closer to store and things like that. But we go back to the barriers to entry. Domestic market is a very different market to deep sea. So domestic market, we need that loading gauge to get the wider, longer containers on, to get the pallet count up. It's the timings. So looking at the 90-mile-an-hour trials, 4.5 hours to Scotland and back, that potentially opens a brand new market for that as well, because actually we're a non-demand culture now. Everybody has Prime and it all comes tomorrow morning. Well, we're similar to that. We store orders and things like that. You can order up to 10 o'clock at night, expect it to install 6 o'clock in the morning. When you're running 7-8 hour paths and then got to go and load the box and get the box in the terminal before the train departs, that stretches that order window for the customers out so far that it just becomes unviable before it starts. If you can do 4.5 hours to Scotland, you're now competing with road to get that. And once again, asset utilisation to bring the cost down, because the cost is a barrier. Closer you to get to the consumer, the thinner the margins get. And we're starting from a big cost point on rail. If we can get that asset utilisation down as well, 2 trains, one set of kit, because of the speed as well, that helps with the economics and pushes us down and gives us that opportunity to get that through.
And Matthew, there's quite a lot of aggregation goes on in other European railways, and you've got some interest in mainland Europe as well. What can we learn from Europe?
I think in Europe they're facing a lot of the same challenges, but there are certainly areas in which there's been slightly more progress. I think some of the infrastructure issues are not quite as acute as they are on our side. The distances lend themselves, I think, to rail freight on the continent. They do have an extended market. There are some issues that are still to be overcome, I think, with cross-border movements, and the slightly slow deployment of the ERTMS signalling system is cause for some concern in some areas, I think. But in our case, Europort, which is our rail freight business, is demonstrating where a private operator can be successful. It's the leading private freight operator in France, and is now expanding into other parts of Europe, into the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and showing that there really is an opportunity for there. They will be coming up against some barriers that are familiar, I think, to people in this business and in the UK as well. But I think the key learning to take from most of it is that with the right planning and the right infrastructure investment and the right collaboration between 3PLs and between the operators and between the state, you can actually deliver quite good results.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, questions, folks? Any more? No? Okay. Well, let us come down the panel and for just some. I'll ask a question. You can give me your closing remarks. Are you optimistic for rail freight growth? What do you think the next exciting thing is going to be? Cal, I'm coming to you first.
Well, I think we've talked a lot about it, is the high speed, the opportunity to run more high speed, more on the west coast, more on the east coast. That's always a good thing. I think in Scotland there's the renewables. We've seen the amount of demand that's coming up for renewables projects, and I think there's probably a lot of places where rail can really support that. We have to be more joined up with the ports. We have to be giving businesses in Scotland, for instance, a quicker route to main ports. So that's a big advantage for a company to be able to export a product all the way via one of the main ports, or even through the tunnels as well. It opens up markets that maybe don't exist right now.
Yeah. Guy, you're always an optimist.
Yeah, I am. Even at what time is it?
Guy's the kind of person you ring when you're having a bad day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Cal's right. I think the opportunities are the higher speed stuff. That's a new area for freight. Barking, because it's mine, I'm interested in, because we're doing something new. We'll be able to run road semi-trailers from continental Europe into the UK. Sadly, until we move our station platforms to the left, you won't get any further, but at least we'll have done something toward that and start to tackle the unaccompanied semi-trailer market into the UK. And the other big event, really, I think, over the next 5-10 years is going to be the transition of our domestic steel industry from Victorian tech to electric arc furnace. And the simply colossal volumes of scrap that are going to need to be collated, transmitted sustainably to those production centres. That is an enormous opportunity for rail. It's not sexy, but it's absolutely part of how you support UK PLC. So that plus all the other organic growth is going to be plenty to be getting on with.
I think it is quite sexy, but there we go. James.
Yeah, pretty much echoing what Callan and Guy just said. It's the international opportunities there. We know we can make that work with the unaccompanied cargo. These opportunities to unitise stuff, such as the scrap, to feed new projects and greener projects. We're also seeing it in the automotive sector. Exciting stuff with the 90-mile-an-hour trials, opens up a brand new market of domestic intermodal, pallet networks and things like that we've never been able to have access to before because of the time frames. And I think there's just a general innovation of the industry moving forward now. with the new kit that's coming on, new wagons that I'm going to be able to do that with, the opportunities will just keep pushing forward. And like I say, green industry, hydrogen and stuff like that, renewables, it'll just keep going and going and going.
Brilliant. Matthew?
Well, two things, perhaps. First, I was going to mention that the general direction of travel between the UK and EU on removing some of the trade barriers is a positive one. I think the slight setback is as a dynamic public affairs person with his finger on the pulse in Westminster, I've heard we might have a change of Prime Minister. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a possibility. That said, I think that's only likely to delay rather than reverse any of the changes and the, I think, quite welcome improvements in the trading relationship with Europe. The ETS linkage in particular might be beneficial for the steel sector, for instance, by removing CBAM implications for them. So I think for trade in general, that is a positive trend. And for rail freight, more specifically, and for international rail freight through the Channel Tunnel, I think we're making good progress. We have capacity in the tunnel. We're seeing investment in the terminals, and hopefully we'll see some investment in the infrastructure to connect that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Last but not least, Mike.
So like Guy, I am a bit of an optimist. So yeah, I do see the outlook for rail freight as being really strong. So from our perspective, just seeing that shift from people like Asda and Tesco and big retailers and BCOs, I think a lot of businesses will follow suit if that's working. And also they're really demanding customers, and I say that from a positive perspective. It drives improvement, it drives faster decision making, and having stepped away from unitised for a few years into a different role in PD and then come back but into a commercial role, like I think rail gets a bit of a hard time sometimes for being a bit slow, but I think having come back to it in this role, I've found our partners to be anything but, to be fair. They've responded really quickly, dynamically. People like Maritime and some of the others that we work with, DB, Freightliner, really responsive, and yeah, I think that's a pretty strong future, I would say.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. That was amazing, thank you. Can I ask you all please to thank our panellists for some really great insights?